I owned 163 acres of working forest outside Bend, Oregon, and had spent 18 years keeping it healthy. Then the development next door cut a 1.8-mile mountain bike trail through my property, removed 214 trees, built 3 bridges across a protected creek, and advertised the route as the main attraction of its luxury HOA. The developer told me a trail didn't count as taking land because I could still walk across it. What she didn't know was that her $12 million resort community had received approval on one specific condition. Every trail had to be built on land the HOA owned or controlled before the first guest was allowed to use it. My name is Dana Whitmore. I'm 57 years old, and I worked for nearly 3 decades as a forest hydrologist. Most people hear that title and imagine I spent my career standing beside rivers with a clipboard. There was some of that, mostly. I studied how logging roads, wildfire, soil compaction, and construction changed the way water moved through forested land. A trail that looks harmless during a dry Oregon summer can become a drainage channel when the winter rain arrives. Water follows the easiest path. So do developers. I purchased the Whitmore Forest property in 2006. The previous owner had clear-cut part of the southern ridge in the late 1980s. Then planted lodgepole pine. Without much planning, the trees grew too close together, competed for water, and became vulnerable to insects and fire. The northern half was in better condition. It contained ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, bitter brush, aspen, and a narrow creek called Alder Run. The creek flowed year-round in most seasons and supported frogs, trout, deer, and the occasional beaver that treated my culverts as personal construction suggestions. I didn't buy the forest to leave every tree untouched. Healthy forests require work. I thinned overcrowded areas, removed diseased trees, maintained fire breaks, repaired old skid roads, and sold limited timber under a long-term management plan. Each harvest covered only a small section. The income paid the property taxes and funded restoration elsewhere. I also allowed a local university to use part of the land for forestry research. Students monitored soil moisture, tree growth, and stream temperature. The property wasn't a park. It wasn't abandoned, and it certainly wasn't free recreational land waiting for somebody to put arrows on trees. For the first 12 years, my eastern neighbor was a cattle ranch owned by the Bell family. The Bells lived near Redmond and used the land seasonally. Our only legal connection was a 30-foot timber access easement, created in 1989. The easement crossed the northern edge of their ranch and connected my forest road to Juniper County Road. It benefited my parcel. That meant I could move forestry equipment across a specific strip of their land. It did not give the ranch access to my forest. In 2019, the Bell family sold 480 acres to Cascade Vista Development Group. The company announced plans for an upscale residential community called Cascade Vista Preserve. The project included 84 homes, a lodge, a pool, a small restaurant, vacation rentals, and what the marketing materials described as an exclusive wilderness experience. The first houses would start at $1 a median. Cascade Vista's founder was Cassidy Rourke. Cassidy was 45 and had previously worked for an outdoor recreation company. She knew how to sell expensive comfort as rugged adventure. She wore hiking boots to planning meetings, arrived in an electric SUV, and used phrases like authentic connection to the landscape. During the development period, her company controlled the HOA board. That arrangement would continue until 75% of the homes were sold. Cassidy visited me before submitting the first site plan. She brought coffee and a professionally printed map. The proposed development stayed more than 200 feet from my boundary. A buffer of existing trees would separate the houses from my logging activity. She asked whether I would consider allowing residents to hike on 2 old forest roads. I said no. The roads were part of an active management system. Log trucks, tractors, and fire crews used them. Public access would create safety and liability problems. Cassidy offered to carry insurance and pay an annual fee. I still declined. I didn't dislike hikers. I disliked mixing recreational traffic with forestry equipment on private land. Cassidy accepted my answer politely. I understand, she said. Maybe once you see how carefully we manage the community, you'll reconsider. I told her she was welcome to ask again. She did not have permission to interpret silence as reconsideration. The county approved Cascade Vista in 2020. Construction continued through the pandemic. and the first residents moved in during the summer of 2022. I expected complaints about chainsaws, prescribed thinning, and logging trucks. Instead, the first year passed quietly. The developer planted additional screening trees near the boundary. Residents waved when I used the timber access road. One family even called to report smoke after lightning struck a pine near Alder Run. Then Cascade Vista opened its trail lodge. The lodge was a modern wooden stone building beside the clubhouse. It contained bike storage, showers, repair stations, and a rental shop operated by an outdoor company. Cassidy advertised 7 miles of private trails with mountain views, creek crossings, and professionally designed descents. I saw the advertisements online. The trail map appeared to remain within Cascade Vista's 480 acres. I had no reason to question it. What I didn't know was that the public map had been simplified. The route shown as the Alder Ridge Loop left HOA property, crossed my eastern boundary, followed Alder Run for nearly a mile, climbed through my research area, and returned to Cascade Vista near the timber access road. On the promotional map, the property line didn't appear. The loop looked like one continuous green trail inside one continuous green forest. Construction began without my knowledge. Cassidy's contractor entered through the timber easement, then crossed from HOA property onto one of my old skid roads. The crew worked during weekdays when I was often consulting in other parts of Central Oregon. They started beneath a tree canopy, nearly half a mile from my house. Unless I happened to be in that section, I couldn't see or hear them. They used a compact excavator, a mini skid steer, chainsaws, and hand crews. Over 11 weeks, they built 8 miles of trail on my land. The route averaged 6 feet wide. In downhill sections, it widened to nearly 10 feet. The crew cut trees, removed stumps, carved bank turns, installed drainage crossings, and built wooden features for mountain bikes. 3 prefabricated bridges crossed Alder Run, and 2 seasonal tributaries. One trail section passed directly through the university's soil moisture study area. The crew removed sensor posts because they assumed the equipment had been abandoned. The first sign of trouble appeared in September. I found 2 cyclists near my equipment shed. They were wearing Cascade Vista guest passes and studying a trail map. I asked how they had entered my property. One of them pointed toward the forest and said they were riding the Alder Ridge Loop. I told them no authorized trail crossed my land. They became apologetic. The map on the Cascade Vista phone application showed their location inside the community trail system. I directed them back to the easement road and asked them to report the problem to the trail lodge. Then I walked into the forest. I found the first trail marker 300 yards from the boundary. It was attached to one of my ponderosa pines. The marker had the Cascade Vista logo, a blue difficulty symbol, and an arrow pointing toward Alder Run. Beyond it, the old skid road had been reshaped into a smooth bike trail. The crew had cut drainage dips through the road crown, built a berm against the uphill bank, and removed several young trees. I followed the trail north. The farther I walked, the worse it became. At the first creek crossing, a timber bridge rested on concrete footings poured into the bank. The contractor had removed streamside vegetation and pushed soil toward the water. At the second crossing, a culvert had been installed beneath the trail, without proper armoring. Fresh sediment covered part of the gravel bed downstream. The route then climbed through a slope where I had conducted selective thinning the previous winter. Workers had cut additional trees to create a descending series of bank turns and jumps. Orange paint marked future feature. They weren't finished. The trail crew intended to continue. I photographed every marker, bridge, cut stump, drainage feature, and piece of equipment I found. Then I checked the university research plot. 9 monitoring stations were gone. 3 had been crushed beside the trail. The remaining 6 had disappeared completely. The university later estimated the equipment and lost data at $27. Ling ling ling. I called Cassidy from the forest. She answered cheerfully and asked whether I had finally tried the new trail. That told me the encroachment wasn't a contractor's navigation mistake. She knew the route crossed my land. You built almost 2 miles of trail on my property. We improved portions of the historic access network. You removed trees and poured bridge footings. The trail was designed by professionals. I didn't ask who designed it. I'm telling you it's on my land. Cassidy said. The 1989 easement gave Cascade Vista recreational access to existing forest roads. I had read that easement more times than she had. It granted the owner of my parcel the right to cross the former Bell Ranch for timber management. It did not grant reciprocal access. It didn't mention hiking. biking, recreation, guests, bridges, or trail construction. Cassidy said her attorney interpreted it differently. I asked her to send me that interpretation in writing. She never did. Instead, she invited me to a meeting at the trail lodge. I went the following morning. Cassidy attended with a man named Owen Blake, who managed the HOA, and a trail designer named Lucas Hart. A 7-foot map of Cascade Vista covered one wall. The older ridge loop was highlighted in green. Approximately 1/4 of the loop crossed my property. There was no boundary line. I asked Lucas what survey he had used. He said Cassidy's development team had provided digital mapping files. Those files identified my old skid roads as part of a recreational access corridor. Lucas assumed the property rights had been secured before his company began work. That was reasonable. Trail designers don't usually conduct title examinations for their clients. Cassidy opened a folder containing the 1989 easement. She pointed to language, granting access for timber operations and related purposes. Her attorney supposedly believed modern forest management included controlled recreation. I asked whether she considered 6-foot jumps and paid vacation guests part of my timber operation. Owen interrupted. He said Cascade Vista had invested more than $480. 0 inches. The full trail network and marketed the Alder Ridge Loop to homeowners, renters, and tourism partners. Closing it would damage property values and expose the HOA to claims. I reminded him that I hadn't approved the investment. Cassidy offered me $12,000 a year for a recreational license. The proposed agreement allowed unlimited use by residents, guests, lodge customers, event participants, maintenance contractors, and emergency personnel. It gave the HOA the right to improve, relocate, widen, and repair trails anywhere inside a 50-foot corridor. It also required me to limit timber operations near the route and notify Cascade Vista 30 days before using heavy equipment. They wanted to pay $12,000 a year to control nearly 2 miles of my forest and restrict the business that had existed before their development. I declined. Cassidy increased the offer to $20. I still said no. Lucas asked whether the trail could remain temporarily while the lawyers reviewed the easement. I said Cascade Vista could finish no additional work. It needed to stop advertising the route, close access at its boundary, and provide a complete construction record. I would assess the damage before discussing restoration. Cassidy folded her arms. A trail isn't ownership. Dana, you can still use every acre. I can't operate equipment safely with cyclists appearing around blind corners. We can schedule around forestry activity. I don't work for your HOA. She said hundreds of people had already used the loop without incident. That made the trespass larger. It didn't make it legal. I gave Cascade Vista one opportunity to fix the problem without litigation. The HOA had 14 days to close the trail, remove its signs, stop construction, provide contractor records, and begin planning restoration with a licensed forester and stream specialist. In return, I wouldn't seek payment for every prior unauthorized entry. I would limit my claim to physical damage, research equipment, restoration, and professional expenses. Cassidy called the proposal disproportionate. She said removing the bridges and berms would cause more environmental damage than leaving them. That might have been true in some locations. It was also why restoration needed professional planning. I wasn't asking a bulldozer to flatten everything the following morning. Cassidy refused to close the route. 2 days later, the HOA sent homeowners an email stating that the neighboring landowner was attempting to revoke historic recreational access. There had never been historic recreational access. Cascade Vista had opened the trail less than 4 months earlier. The email encouraged residents to keep using all marked routes, while the HOA defended its rights. That decision gave me no safe option except to act. I placed temporary closure signs where the route entered my property. I didn't stretch wire across the trail, dig trenches, or create hazards. I installed bright orange barriers that cyclists could see from a distance and left enough space for someone to turn around safely. Each sign read, "Private forestry land trail closed beyond this point. No recreational easement active work area." By noon, someone had removed the northern barrier. My security camera recorded a Cascade Vista maintenance employee loading it into a utility vehicle. I replaced it. The following day, it disappeared again. I sent Cassidy the video. She replied that the barrier interfered with an established easement. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line. A deputy met me at the boundary. He reviewed my deed, the easement, and the video. He explained that the underlying access dispute was civil. The sheriff's office couldn't interpret complex deed language or determine trail rights on the spot. But now that Cascade Vista had received the written notice, employees could not keep removing my signs from land documented as mine. The deputy spoke to Owen. The barriers remained after that. Cyclists continued riding around them. Some probably assumed the signs were part of a dispute that didn't concern them. Others had paid thousands of dollars to stay at Cascade Vista and believed the resort's map over a sign made by one landowner. I installed cameras at 4 entry points. During the next 7 days, they recorded 183 unauthorized trail users. One was a guided group from the lodge. Another was a youth mountain bike camp. Cascade Vista wasn't merely allowing residents to cross my property. It was selling the experience. I hired William Torres, a licensed surveyor, to mark the eastern boundary and map the trail. His crew spent 5 days in the forest. The final survey showed that 614 feet of constructed trail sat on my land. The trail entered my property in 4 locations and crossed Alder Run 3 times. At its deepest point, the route extended nearly 3/4 of a mile west of the boundary. There was no possibility that the crew had drifted a few feet over an uncertain line. They had built an entire destination loop inside my forest. A consulting forester counted 214 removed trees with trunk diameters greater than 4 inches. Most were young ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine. 15 were mature trees more than 18 inches in diameter. The forester also documented root damage, soil compaction, and approximately 6 acres affected by construction access and material storage. A stream consultant inspected the bridges. None of the crossings appeared in county or state permit records. The concrete footings narrowed part of the channel. The culvert at the seasonal tributary had been installed too high, creating erosion at its outlet. Fine sediment had traveled at least 260 feet downstream. Restoring the property wouldn't be as simple as removing signs and scattering grass seed. The preliminary estimate was $286. That included trail decompaction, drainage repair, bridge removal, stream bank stabilization, replanting, monitoring, research equipment, and professional supervision. The timber value of the cut trees was relatively small. The expensive part was repairing the system those trees had supported. I sent the reports to Cassidy. Her attorney responded with a demand that I remove the barriers and stop interfering with Cascade Vista's easement. The latter threatened claims for lost revenue, reduced property value, and damage to the HOA's reputation. I had already spent nearly $18,000 on surveys and environmental assessments. A lawsuit could cost 10 times that amount and take years. Cassidy knew it. She believed the developer-controlled HOA could outspend one forest owner. I decided not to begin with court. I began with permits. The county land use office took 6 business days to inspect. A water resources specialist visited 2 days later. They confirmed that the bridges, culvert, grading, and trail construction had not been approved for my parcel. Cascade Vista possessed permits for trails inside the development. Those permits stopped at the HOA boundary. The county issued notices requiring immediate suspension of construction and public use in the unauthorized area. It also required an erosion control plan within 15 days. The Water Resources Office ordered the HOA to stabilize exposed soil near Alder Run before the seasonal rains. Cassidy told homeowners the notices were administrative and would be resolved. Then she removed the Alder Ridge Loop from the public website. The route remained active inside the Cascade Vista phone application. My cameras recorded 62 users over the next weekend. I sent the footage to the county. Inspectors issued a formal violation with escalating daily penalties if the HOA failed to close access. Cascade Vista finally installed its own barriers at the boundary. For the first time in 4 months, my forest became quiet again. Then I submitted a public records request for the original Cascade Vista approval. The file contained thousands of pages. Traffic studies, wildfire plans, water calculations, wildlife reports, landscape drawings, and a recreation plan used to support the development's conditional use application. The county had allowed Cascade Vista to operate vacation rentals, a trail lodge, and paid recreation services inside a residential development, because Cassidy represented them as controlled amenities rather than unrestricted commercial attractions. The approval required every trail to remain on land owned by the developer or covered by a recorded recreational easement. Before opening any route, Cascade Vista had to submit a final trail map and proof of land control. I found the preliminary map. It showed the Alder Ridge Loop crossing my property. Beside that section was a note. Off-site recreational easement to be acquired prior to construction. There was no final easement. There was no updated map removing my land. Cassidy had simply built the trail and opened it. Then I found the trail lodge's occupancy review. The building had been approved as part of a coordinated recreation system with 7 miles of controlled trails. Its rental business, guided tours, equipment operation, an annual bike festival, all depended on compliance with that recreation plan. Without the Alder Ridge Loop, the legal network contained only 6 miles. The missing mileage didn't automatically close every HOA path. It did mean Cascade Vista no longer matched the commercial operation the county had approved. One final document explained why Cassidy had taken the risk. Her company had a construction loan tied to home sales. The lender released a $3.2 million amenities payment after the trail lodge opened and the full 7-mile network became operational. Cassidy had certified that all required recreational property rights were in place. The payment had been released 3 months earlier. She hadn't built on my land because she misunderstood one sentence in an old timber easement. She built there because she needed 4 additional miles of trail before the lender's deadline. And her own property didn't contain enough completed routes. The next scheduled bank inspection was 12 days away. David prepared a factual notice containing the survey, county violations, permis conditions, and the preliminary map stating that an easement still needed to be acquired. Before we sent it, I called Cassidy one last time. I offered the same resolution as before. Close the trail, cooperate with professional restoration, pay the documented costs, and correct the representations made to the county and lender. Cassidy was silent for several seconds. Then she said the development would purchase the affected section of my forest for $300. Lenini, I told her it wasn't for sale. She raised the offer to $500. Ling, I still declined. You're choosing a few trees over 84 families. She said, no. You chose my trees because you wanted 84 buyers to think they came with the houses. At 9 the next morning, David delivered the notice to the county planning director and Cascade Vista's construction lender. By noon, the county suspended commercial operations at the trail lodge, pending a compliance review. The lender froze Cascade Vista's final amenities draw and demanded proof of every trail easement shown in the loan certification. Cassidy had 7 business days to produce them. She couldn't produce mine because it had never existed. The lender's compliance department didn't accuse Cassidy of fraud. Banks don't usually begin with dramatic language. They begin with document requests. Cascade Vista received a list requiring recorded easements, title reports, trail surveys, contractor invoices, county approvals, and the certification Cassidy had signed before the $3.2 million amenities payment was released. The bank also hired an independent engineer to inspect the trail system. Cassidy had 7 business days to respond. On the second day, her attorney filed a lawsuit against me. Cascade Vista claimed the 1,989 timber access easement created an implied reciprocal right to use the old forest roads for recreation. It asked the court for a temporary order requiring me to remove the barriers while the ownership question was resolved. The complaint described the Alder Ridge Loop as a historic trail improved through good faith maintenance. It didn't mention the 214 cut trees. It didn't mention the new bridges. It didn't mention the concrete footings, bike jumps, contractor invoices, or county records, labeling the easement as still needing to be acquired. Cassidy also claimed the closure created a safety hazard because riders could become confused and turn onto active forestry roads. That argument had a simple solution. Stop sending riders toward my boundary. Cascade Vista's barriers, application map, and trail lodge staff could direct people onto the full 6 miles of legal trails. Inside the development, the confusion existed because the HOA's phone application continued displaying a route it didn't control. The judge scheduled a temporary order hearing for the following week. David prepared a response using the easement document, Williams' survey, the county violations, and affidavits from the Bell family. Robert Bell had signed the 1989 agreement with my property's former owner. He was 78 and still lived near Redmond. His declaration explained that the easement had been created because the forest parcel lacked practical access for log trucks. It was never intended to provide the ranch with access into the forest. The Bells had never used it that way. Cassidy's reciprocal right argument didn't merely lack supporting language. It contradicted the people who had created the agreement. Lucas, the trail designer, provided a declaration too. He confirmed that his firm had received a digital route file showing the older ridge loop crossing my property. Cassidy's project manager had told him off-site access was being finalized. Lucas had no reason to believe construction was unauthorized until I confronted him at the trail lodge. After our meeting, he recommended suspending work. Cascade Vista terminated his company's contract 2 days later and hired a separate crew to complete the unfinished features. That explained why Carlos's equivalent in this story had disappeared from the project. The professional who raised questions had been replaced. The temporary order hearing lasted less than 2 hours. Cassidy's attorney argued that the easement language should be interpreted broadly because modern forest uses included recreation. The judge asked whether Cascade Vista owned or managed my forest. It didn't. He asked whether the easement named the Bell Ranch as a benefited parcel. It didn't. He asked why the county recreation plan said an off-site easement still needed to be acquired if Cascade Vista already possessed access under the 1989 agreement. Cassidy's attorney said the note may have reflected unnecessary caution by a planner. The judge wasn't persuaded. He denied the request to reopen the trail. He didn't issue a final ruling on every claim. That would require additional proceedings, but Cascade Vista hadn't shown a likely legal right to send residents, rental guests, guide, and commercial events across my land. The barriers remained. The county also ordered the route removed from every digital and printed trail map. Cascade Vista complied 3 days later. By then, homeowners had begun asking questions. Most buyers had been told the community included 7 miles of private trails. Several purchase brochures called the older ridge loop the signature feature of the development. A promotional video showed riders crossing one of the bridges on my land. Cassidy appeared in the video and described the route as protected community wilderness. She had filmed that segment 3 months before construction finished. She knew exactly where the trail went. Evan and Rachel Monroe owned a house near the trail lodge. They had moved from Portland and paid $1.38 million for what they believed was direct access to a managed mountain bike network. Evan called me after finding my number in the county complaint file. He wasn't hostile. He wanted to understand what had happened. I invited him and Rachel to walk the boundary with William and me. We started at Cascade Vista's northern barrier. William showed them the recorded line and the trail crossing. Then we followed the route through my forest. Rachel stopped beside the university research area. Broken sensor housing still lay near the edge of the trail. She asked whether the HOA knew the equipment belonged to a university. I showed her the metal research signs that had been removed from their posts and tossed behind a log. At Elder Run, Evan examined the bridge footings and eroded bank. He'd worked in commercial construction and recognized that the crossing hadn't been built as simple maintenance. This wasn't an old trail, he said. No. They built all of this in LA for weeks. Why didn't anyone ask you? That's the question your developer keeps avoiding. I didn't ask Evan and Rachel to fight the HOA for me. I gave them copies of the public documents and let them decide what to do. They organized a homeowner meeting at the lodge. Cassidy refused to attend, saying active litigation prevented her from discussing details. Her attorney could have attended and limited the discussion to verified facts. She chose not to send him either. 43 owners attended. More joined online. Evan displayed the preliminary recreation map with the note stating that an easement had to be acquired before construction. Then he showed Cassidy's lender certification claiming the property rights were already in place. A homeowner asked Owen whether the HOA had paid for trail construction on my property. Owen said the developer had managed the amenities budget before transferring expenses to the association. That answer created more questions. Under the purchase contracts, each new homeowner paid a $12,500 capital contribution to the HOA at closing. Part of that money funded recreation amenities. If homeowner contributions had paid for unauthorized construction, the issue wasn't only between Cassidy and me. The residents had purchased it. Evan requested the HOA's detailed trail invoices and bank statements. Cassidy's developer-controlled board denied the request, claiming the records involved proprietary construction information. Oregon HOA records aren't automatically open without limitation, and some documents can legitimately remain confidential. Invoices paid with association money are harder to hide behind the word proprietary. The homeowners retained their own attorney while they fought for the financial records. The weather changed. A Pacific storm system was forecast to bring several inches of rain over 5 days. The unauthorized trail remained closed. But closure signs wouldn't stop water. The bank turns and compacted trail surface could channel runoff downhill. The unfinished culvert near Alder Run was particularly vulnerable. If the embankment failed, sediment could enter the creek and damage habitat well beyond my property. The county gave Cascade Vista 48 hours to submit an emergency stabilization plan. Cassidy's attorney argued that the barriers prevented the HOA's contractors from entering. That wasn't true. I had prohibited recreational use. Not necessary. Environmental work performed under an approved plan. I granted Cascade Vista a 14-day temporary access license. The license allowed only named contractors, county inspectors, and environmental specialists to enter for stabilization. It required advance notice, insurance, caméra documentation, and restoration of any additional damage. The fee was $1. Cassidy asked why I wasn't charging the HOA. Because keeping soil out of the creek isn't a negotiating tactic. The stabilization crew arrived the next morning. Under the county specialist's supervision, workers installed fiber rolls, water bars, erosion control blankets, and temporary drainage outlets. They removed loose soil from the stream banks by hand. They didn't dismantle the bridges or begin permanent restoration. That required a larger plan. The storm arrived Friday evening. Over the next 4 days, nearly 4 inches of rain fell on the forest. The emergency measures held in most locations. One bank turn failed near the southern tributary. Water cut through the berm and carried soil 60 feet downhill before a fiber roll stopped it. The elevated culvert overflowed but remained in place. Alder Run turned cloudy for several hours, then cleared. Without the stabilization work, the damage would have been much worse. I sent Cassidy a written thank you for authorizing her contractor to respond quickly. She didn't answer. Her project manager did. He said the crew appreciated being allowed to work without confrontation. That was the difference Cassidy never seemed to understand. I wasn't trying to prevent responsible work. I was trying to prevent her from deciding that all work became responsible once she had paid someone to do it. The county required a permanent restoration plan within 30 days. Me Forster, the stream consultant, the university, and Cascade Vista's environmental contractor met on the property. We divided the route into sections. Some areas could be restored by removing imported material, loosening compacted soil, reshaping drainage, and replanting native vegetation. Other sections followed old skid roads that still had forestry value. In those areas, full recontouring would cause unnecessary disturbance. The road could remain, but bike features, signs, berms, and recreational structures had to be removed. The bridges required individual treatment. One could be lifted out without entering the channel. The second had concrete footings that needed to be cut at ground level and left below the undisturbed bank rather than excavated. The third had narrowed Alder Run and had to be fully removed under a stream work permit. Restoration would take 2 construction seasons and 3 years of monitoring. The updated estimate was $342. Ling. Cascade Vista proposed paying half. Cassidy argued that portions of the trail improve my forestry access and increase the value of my property. My forester disagreed. Several berms blocked equipment drainage. Tight turns designed for bicycles couldn't accommodate log trucks. The creek bridges weren't rated for forestry vehicles. The improvements benefited only the activity Cascade Vista had sold. I asked for full restoration, replacement of university equipment, the reimbursement of surveys and experts, and compensation for the 214 trees. I did not demand a share of every home sale. I didn't claim the entire $3.2 million bank payment. My documented demand was $421. Ling. Cassidy called it opportunistic. Then, she offered to buy 50 acres surrounding the trail for $750. Ling. The price was well below comparable forest values. But that wasn't why I refused. Selling the corridor would divide my property, interfere with wildfire management, and give Cascade Vista control of Alder Run. The forest wasn't a broken appliance. I wanted somebody to take away after damaging it. I told her no. The lender's engineer completed his inspection during the same week. His report confirmed that only 6 miles of Cascade Vista's 7-mile advertised trail network sat on land the development controlled. Of that legal mileage, nearly 1 mile remained unfinished or didn't meet the design shown in the amenities certification. The report also identified discrepancies in the trail construction invoices. Cascade Vista had certified that $1.08 million had been spent completing the full network. Contractor records documented approximately $742. 0 inches direct trail work. Cassidy said the difference represented design, management, equipment, marketing, and developer overhead. Those costs might have been legitimate. The bank wanted details. Its compliance department expanded their review into a full amenities audit. The audit delayed future loan draws and prevented Cassidy's company from releasing profits from the final home sales. It also required Cascade Vista Development to place $1.2 million into a restricted reserve until the trail, county, and property rights issues were resolved. The money didn't go to me. It remained under bank control as protection against potential losses. Cassidy's cash flow problem became immediate. Construction continued on houses already funded, but she couldn't freely use proceeds from new closings. She responded by transferring more trail expenses to the HOA. The Developer Control Board approved an emergency assessment of $6.04 per home. The notice said the money would cover trail remediation, legal defense, and replacement. Recreational amenities. Owners had 30 days to pay. Evans' attorney challenged the assessment. The purchase documents assigned responsibility for completing promised amenities to the developer during the declarant control period. The HOA could pay for normal maintenance. It wasn't clear that Cassidy could charge homeowners to correct unauthorized construction she had performed before turning over the association. More than 60 owners submitted formal objections. Cassidy postponed the collection deadline but didn't withdraw the assessment. Then she presented a new trail plan to replace the Alder Ridge Loop. Cascade Vista would build 7 miles of additional trail on its own western slope. The developer owned that land, but the terrain was steeper. The soils were more erosive, and part of the route crossed winter deer habitat identified in the development's wildlife plan. The county required environmental review. The trail designer estimated construction and mitigation at $1.86 million. It would take at least 10 months. Cassidy suggested that my $421,000 restoration demand was forcing homeowners to pay nearly $2 million for replacement trails. That was backwards. Her decision to sell mileage she didn't own created both expenses. The homeowners began collecting votes to end developer control of the HOA. Cascade Vista's declaration transferred control. When 75% of the 84 planned homes had been sold, 61 homes had closed. Cassidy's company still controlled the remaining 23 lots. The threshold required 63 sales. She needed only 2 more closings to trigger transition. 2 houses were already under contract. At first, that looked like good news. Then homeowners learned Cassidy had delayed both closing dates. If the sales completed, she would lose control of the board before the assessment and trail settlement were resolved. Evans sent a formal demand that the developer stop manipulating the transition schedule. The buyers of the 2 homes became involved after discovering their completed houses were being held for unexplained administrative review. One threatened to cancel. The other contacted the bank. Cassidy moved the closings forward. Both completed within 9 days. The transition threshold had been reached. Under the declaration, the developer had 60 days to provide records and schedule an election. Cassidy used every one of them. Meanwhile, the bank audit continued. David received documents through the lawsuit that the homeowners had been unable to obtain directly. They included contracts between Cascade Vista Development, the HOA, and a company called Rourke Outdoor Services. Rourke Outdoor had provided project management, equipment rental, and trail maintenance. It shared an office address with Cassidy's development company. Its sole owner was Cassidy's brother, Dean. Related companies aren't automatically illegal. Developers often use affiliated contractors. The relationship should be disclosed, and charges should reflect real services. The invoices raised concerns. Rourke Outdoor had billed the HOA $186 per hour for a compact excavator with an operator. The trail contractor's records showed the same machine and operator had been supplied to Rourke Outdoor for $112 per hour. The difference was labeled coordination overhead. The company charged similar markups on labor, materials, and bridge components. Across the full trail network, Rourke Outdoor collected approximately $268.000 more than the underlying subcontractors charged. Some markup was normal. The homeowners needed to know whether the board had approved that amount and whether Cassidy had disclosed the family relationship. The board minutes contained no disclosure. Then David found a chain of emails between Lucas and Cassidy. 6 weeks before construction entered my land, Lucas asked for the recorded off-site easement. Cassidy replied that the document was being finalized. 3 weeks later, he asked again. She told him to proceed with clearing because the owner had been approached and would accept compensation once she saw the value of the completed route. I had never agreed to that. I hadn't even known construction had started. Lucas responded that his firm needed written authorization before off-site work. Cassidy removed his company from that portion of the project and assigned the work to Rourke Outdoor Services. Her brother's company completed the one 8 miles across my forest. That explained why the crew had entered through the timber easement, worked beneath the canopy, and never contacted me. The related contractor hadn't made a boundary mistake. It had been hired after another company refused to cross the boundary without documentation. David sent the emails and contracts to the bank's auditor, the homeowner's attorney, and Cassidy's counsel. The following morning, Cassidy cancelled our scheduled restoration meeting. At noon, the bank demanded repayment or additional collateral for the $3.2 million amenities release. At 3, the incoming homeowners transition committee notified Cassidy that it would seek reimbursement of every undisclosed related party charge. And just before 5, Dean Rourke's attorney contacted David. Dean was prepared to cooperate. He had saved every instruction his sister gave him, including a voice message recorded the night before his crew first crossed onto my property. In it, Cassidy didn't mention a timber easement. She didn't say she believed the trail was legal. She said, "Get the off-site section finished before Dana realizes where the loop goes. Once the lodge is open, she'll take the money instead of making us tear it all out." Cassidy had never misunderstood the boundary. She had built the trail as a bargaining strategy. Dean's voice message changed the nature of every negotiation. Until then, Cassidy could still argue that she had misunderstood the 1,989 easement, relied on an attorney, or believed I would eventually approve the route. Her own words removed those explanations. She knew I hadn't authorized the trail. She knew her first designer had refused to proceed without documentation, and she deliberately hired her brother's company to finish the off-site section before I discovered it. David didn't release the recording publicly. He provided authenticated copies to Cassidy's attorney, the bank auditor, the homeowner's attorney, and the county compliance office. Dean signed a declaration explaining when and how he received the message. He also produced the original phone containing the recording. His cooperation didn't make him innocent. Rourke Outdoor Services had entered my land, cut trees, built bridges, and built the HOA for the work. But it prevented Cassidy from blaming the construction entirely on her brother. Dean had saved messages because the two of them had already been arguing over unpaid invoices. Family loyalty tends to weaken when several $100,000 are involved. Cassidy's attorney requested a confidential settlement meeting. David agreed, provided the environmental deadlines remained in place. The forest couldn't wait while lawyers negotiated. Our first meeting lasted almost 6 hours. Cassidy attended with 2 attorneys, a bank representative, Dean's attorney, the HOA transition counsel, and an insurance adjuster. She looked tired, but remained controlled. She began by offering $280,000 toward restoration if I granted Cascade Vista a permanent hiking easement over the old skid road sections. Bicycles and commercial tours would be prohibited. I declined. She raised the payment to $400,000 and reduced the proposed easement to a 5-year license. I still declined. The forest wasn't a bargaining chip. Every license proposal would keep the dispute alive, complicate forestry operations, and reward the decision to build before asking. I wanted the unauthorized route closed and restored. Cassidy said full restoration would waste hundreds of thousands of dollars in usable infrastructure. The infrastructure is only usable for the business you built it to serve. The residents already paid for it. They paid you for a trail you didn't own. The bank representative ended that line of argument. The lender wanted a clear property resolution, not another temporary agreement dependent on my continued cooperation. Without a permanent easement, it would not count any portion of the off-site route as a Cascade Vista asset. Cassidy asked whether I understood that rejecting a license could damage homeowners who had done nothing wrong. I did. That was why my demand focused on the developer, the related contractor, and applicable insurance, not a new homeowner assessment. The incoming HOA board hadn't caused the encroachment. It shouldn't inherit the bill if the parties responsible had enough resources to pay it. We didn't reach an agreement that day, but Cassidy stopped describing the trail as a historic right. That argument was finished. 2 weeks later, Cascade Vista held its transition election. Evan Monroe became president. Rachel accepted a position on the finance committee. Kenneth, a retired accountant, became treasurer. 2 other residents joined the board, and 1 seat went to a developer representative until the final homes were completed. Cassidy lost control of the HOA. The new board's first vote cancelled the $6,400 emergency assessment. Owners who had paid early received refunds. The board's second vote removed Rock Outdoor Services from every HOA contract. Its third authorized an independent audit of all developer-era amenity expenses. Evans sent me a copy of the resolution. He didn't ask me to reduce my restoration claim. He asked for 30 days to separate the homeowner's responsibilities from the developer's and their. I agreed. The audit confirmed that $716.0 HOA funds had been spent on trail construction, maintenance, project management, and equipment. Rock Outdoor had received $438.000 of that amount. The auditors identified $268.0 related company markups, including charges that had never been separately approved by the board. Not every markup was improper. Equipment brokers and project managers legitimately charge more than their direct costs. The problem was disclosure. Cassidy had sat on both sides of the approval process while her brother's company collected the difference. The homeowners demanded repayment of $221.0 unsupported or undisclosed charges. Dean settled for $164.000 and waived another $39.0 unpaid invoices. He also agreed to contribute labor and equipment to the restoration at direct cost under the control of an independent environmental contractor. Rock Outdoor wouldn't supervise the work. It would supply machines and operators where professionals determined they could be used safely. The bank completed its amenities audit soon afterward. Cassidy's certification had overstated both the controlled trail mileage and completion status. The lender declared a technical default but didn't immediately foreclose. Foreclosure would have harmed buyers, unfinished home contractors, and the bank itself. Instead, the parties entered a workout agreement. Cascade Vista Development had to contribute $1.85 million in additional collateral, replace Cassidy as the person responsible for lender certifications, and hire an independent completion manager. Profit distributions remained frozen until the property dispute, restoration plan, and remaining amenities were resolved. Cassidy stepped down from daily management of the development. Her company still owned unfinished lots, but she no longer signed bank certifications or controlled construction draws. The lender also cancelled the Western Replacement Trail expansion. It wouldn't finance $1.86 million in new construction, while the original trail violation remained unresolved. Cascade Vista's commercial trail lodge operations stayed suspended. Residents could use the legal trails on HOA property, but the lodge couldn't sell rentals, guided rides, festival access, or vacation packages based on the unauthorized network. That suspension lasted 14 months. The lodge had projected nearly $900.0 commercial revenue during that period. It collected less than 1/3 of that through limited resident services and retail sales. The final settlement came together 6 weeks after the HOA transition. Cascade Vista Development agreed to pay the full restoration cost. It reimbursed my surveys, forestry assessment, stream studies, legal expenses, university equipment, and lost management income. It also funded 3 years of environmental monitoring. The total payment and restoration commitment was $508. Liu Bai, of that amount, 342美元，000 was reserved for physical restoration and monitoring. The university received $31,400 for equipment and interrupted research. Illegal surveying and expert costs totaled $82. Bai. The remaining amount covered the removed trees, lost forestry use, and administrative time. I didn't receive the full restoration reserve as cash. It sat in an escrow account and paid contractors after inspections confirmed completed work. That protected both sides. Cascade Vista knew the money would be used for the forest. I knew funding couldn't disappear halfway through the job. The HOA paid none of my settlement. Its contribution was cooperation, permanent closure of the off-site route, and correction of all maps and Cascade Vista Development and its insurers funded the rest. Cassidy signed the agreement on behalf of her company. She didn't apologize. She did acknowledge in writing that no recreational easement had ever existed. The company dismissed its lawsuit with prejudice and recorded a clarification stating that the 1,989 easement benefited only my forest parcel for timber and land management access. A future owner wouldn't be able to revive Cassidy's reciprocal use argument. The county approved the restoration plan in early spring. Work began after the wettest part of the season ended. The first phase focused on Alder Run. Crews installed temporary sediment controls and isolated small work areas without diverting the entire creek. The upstream bridge was lifted out in one piece. Its concrete supports remained outside the active channel and could be removed with minimal excavation. At the second bridge, workers cut the embedded supports below the restored bank surface rather than digging out large blocks and damaging tree roots. The third crossing required the most care. The contractor removed the undersized culvert, reshaped the channel, placed appropriately sized rock, and stabilized the banks with live willow stakes and biodegradable erosion fabric. A fisheries specialist inspected the work before water returned to the channel. The creek looked raw for several weeks. Restoration rarely looks natural on the day it's finished. Plants need time. Water needs to redistribute sediment. Roots need to hold the soil. The second phase addressed the trail itself. Workers removed signs, jumps, imported gravel, wooden features, and artificial berms. They loosened compacted soil, using small equipment where slopes allowed and hand tools near sensitive areas. Drainage was restored across the trail rather than along it. On steep sections, crews installed woody debris and erosion control structures to slow runoff. We didn't erase every old skid road. Some had existed before Cascade Vista and remained necessary for wildfire response and forestry work. Those sections returned to gated management roads. They were no longer mapped, marked, or maintained as recreational trails. The university rebuilt its research stations with funding from the settlement. Students installed new sensors and added protective cages around the equipment. They also created a study comparing soil recovery in compacted trail sections with undisturbed forest. Cassidy's damage became useful data. That didn't excuse it. It meant the university refused to waste the opportunity to learn from it. Replanting began in the fall. The restoration plan didn't call for replacing every cut tree with a mature tree of equal size. Transporting and installing 214 full-grown forest trees would have been impractical, expensive, and environmentally disruptive. Instead, crews planted more than 600 native seedlings and shrubs in patterns designed to support natural regeneration. Ponderosa pine went onto the drier slopes. Aspen and willow were planted near seasonal drainage. Native grasses and bitterbrush stabilized disturbed soil. Survival targets required at least 75% of the planted trees and shrubs to remain healthy after 3 years. If survival dropped below the target, the developer-funded reserve would pay for replacements. The first monitoring report showed 87% survival. The second year dropped to 81% after a hot summer. Still above target. Alder Run's turbidity returned to normal levels. Native vegetation covered most of the restored banks. The outline of the former bike trail remained visible from the air. But on the ground, young plants had begun breaking it apart. Forests don't heal on a quarterly schedule. They heal one root system at a time. The homeowners redesigned their legal trail system without entering my property. They didn't build the expensive western expansion. Instead, a professional designer reworked existing routes inside Cascade Vista's boundary, added connector paths, and created shorter loops using land the HOA already owned. The final network measured 3 miles. That was less than the 7 miles Cassidy had advertised. It was also real. The county approved a scaled commercial plan for the trail lodge. Guided tours remained entirely on HOA land. Group sizes were limited. The annual bike festival was replaced with smaller resident events. The lodge reopened 14 months after its suspension. It never became the regional adventure destination Cassidy had promised. It became a useful neighborhood facility with bike storage, repairs, showers, and access to a modest legal trail system. Most residents preferred that to another lawsuit. The county assessed $86, 0 civil penalties, inspection costs, and environmental fees against Cascade Vista development. No one went to prison. The dispute involved trespass, permit violations, inaccurate certifications, and financial misconduct claims. The lender and HOA resolved most issues through civil agreements. Authorities reviewed the records but didn't announce criminal charges. Some homeowners felt that was too lenient. I didn't. The purpose of my response wasn't to create the harshest ending possible. It was to restore the land, protect the creek, correct the records, and place the costs on the people who caused them. That happened. Cassidy's company lost approximately $4.3 million through restoration. Lender reserves, frozen profits, penalties, legal expenses, related party repayments, cancelled commercial revenue, and the cost of completing alternative amenities. Not all of that money vanished permanently. The $1.85 million in additional collateral remained part of the bank workout, and some frozen proceeds were eventually released. But Cassidy lost control of when and how the money could be used. She had tried to avoid a legitimate easement negotiation and a $342,000 restoration obligation. Her shortcut created consequences more than 10 times larger. Cascade Vista Development completed the remaining houses under an independent manager. Cassidy sold her interest in the final undeveloped tract to another company. She remained in real estate but left the outdoor resort business. Dean dissolved Rourke Outdoor Services after completing its settlement obligations. Evans served 2 years as HOA president. During that time, he created a rule requiring title review and a license survey before any association project approached an external property line. The board also separated homeowner funds from developer obligations and published every contract involving a board member, relative, or affiliated business. Those policies weren't dramatic. They were effective 3 years after the restoration began. Evan invited me to the Trail Lodge. The HOA had installed a new map. Every route ended well inside the Cascade Vista boundary. A shaded area west of the development was labeled simply Private Working Forest. No public access. There was no suggested route, dotted connector, or arrow pointing through it. Evan asked whether the label was accurate. It is. He smiled. That may be the most expensive line we've ever added to a map. He wasn't wrong. I still use the 1989 timber easement to reach Juniper County Road. Cascade Vista maintains its portion because the recorded agreement requires reasonable access. I notify the HOA before moving large equipment. Not because Cassidy's proposed license demanded it, but because communication helps residents avoid log trucks. That's how a real shared arrangement works. Each side understands what the document allows. Neither side quietly expands it for profit. All the run is clear again. The university sensors transmit data every 15 minutes. Young pines grow where bike jumps once stood. I can still identify the route if I know where to look. A few curves remain in the soil, and one old stump carries a faded blue paint mark beneath new moss. The forest remembers disturbance longer than people do. That's why rickets and restoration matter. Cassidy once told me a trail wasn't ownership because I could still walk across it. She misunderstood the problem. I never objected because the trail prevented me from walking. I objected because she treated my ability to step over her construction as permission to build it. Land doesn't become community property when enough people download a map. An easement doesn't appear because a lender deadline arrives. And a finished trail doesn't become legal simply because tearing it out is expensive. Cassidy believed that once the lodge opened, I would take her money, rather than make her remove the root. She was right about one thing. I did take money. Every dollar went toward putting the forest back where her trail had been.